Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts Podcast. My name's Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs and try to do those things more responsibly. Today, I have a conversation for you with my friend Gabriel, and this is probably my favorite conversation to date, and we talk about beauty. I have sort of hinted at it in this channel before, but this is sort of my first time really addressing the idea of beauty ethics, and I just had such a good time talking with Gabriel. He's always such a good conversationalist, but I think he said a lot of really interesting and beautiful things about beauty, and I hope you enjoy it and get something from it. Gabriel.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming in, having a conversation with me.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
I know, I'm very excited. So before we dive in, why don't you just give a kind of a little introduction? Who are you? Anything, you think is important?
Okay, so first of all, I'm a Kiwi, so I'm from New Zealand. I've been living in the States maybe 3 or 4 years now. I moved here to live with my wife, who's an American, also a Jewish woman, I believe might have been on this very podcast.
She was indeed.
And so in terms of my real interests in life, I would say religion, psychology, philosophy, and in terms of my religion, because I know this podcast kind of deals with religion a lot, and I know we're talking about beauty, but that kind of intersects with religion too, so we're probably going to talk about religion. So my background is a Christian background, a Catholic background specifically, and then kind of exploring in a way at the moment, I think broadly culturally certainly Christian, and certainly very influenced by that worldview. But really sort of very interested in other religions as well, very interested in just ideas in general. So those are my real passions. And then in terms of what I'm doing with my life, what I'm attempting to do with my life, it's really in the field of psychotherapy. So I just graduated with a master's degree in counselling, and so I'm looking forward to, we'll actually be moving back to New Zealand. I'm looking forward to putting that into practice.
Yeah, very cool. So we met through a Jordan Peterson group.
Yes.
And I've enjoyed talking sort of religion and philosophy with both you and your wife. I just find it so interesting. And I wanted you to come in because I have been working through this idea of beauty. And it seems, and especially sort of this beauty ethic, and it seems like you have sort of an interest and an intrigue to that as well. So I'll throw it off to you to start. Like, what interests you in the idea of beauty? Like, why do you find it interesting? And then we can kind of go from there and probably go back and forth and try to unpack it.
Yeah. Well, it's a very broad and deep subject, and there's a lot of places that you could go with it. I mean, I mentioned that my primary interests are kind of psychology and religion and philosophy, and in a way, beauty is the intersection of all three of those. In terms of psychology, it's got such a powerful impact on people. It's such a expression in terms of art of the human psyche. In terms of religion, obviously, that is full of beauty. It's almost beauty embodied, beauty instantiated in ritual and like literal iconography, things like that. And then philosophy, I think at least good philosophy tries to deal with beauty classically, traditionally, right? In terms of going back to Plato, it's held beauty as being one of the most central topics to explore and to fall in love with, really, if you're talking about Plato. So that's why I'm interested in beauty, also because I'm just a human, right? And I think that humans are innately drawn to beauty and innately inspired by beauty and drawn to create more beauty. And it's just so interwoven with being human that it's kind of hard to ignore.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think there's something so innately tied to beauty, like in the human experience. Yeah, I think in the modern frame, there's a lot of sort of rejection of beauty, of like beauty being deceiving, beauty being a distraction from truth. And I think through reading, the book by Timothy Petisis and just sort of really thinking about all of that stuff, it's gotten me very interested in this journey of like, how should we pursue beauty and how integral is it to like the understanding of like how we should live, but I mean, I think it's really interesting you talk about it even in psychology. Do you think that there's a piece of sort of the psychological that tries to ignore beauty in sort of a modern frame?
I mean, I think it really does depend. I'm very influenced by Carl Jung, and so I mean, I think it's pretty central for him.
Mm.
I mean, it's really healing, essentially, for him. Someone like Freud, who was essentially Jung's teacher, he would have more of a reductive approach, right? Like beauty is some expression of the human psyche, and specifically in a neurotic way, right? Like it's an expression of some inner conflict or tension or something that went wrong in childhood. I'm simplifying Freud, obviously, but that's the general gist of it. Whereas Jung, it's something almost transcendental. It's something that is calling and inspiring and drawing humanity onward and drawing the individual onward to greater integration. It's not something that's kind of the residue of, a traumatic experience in the past or something like that. And so it really depends at what area of psychology you look at. Obviously, if you're talking academic psychology, there's a tendency to try and just maybe science in general, right, to try and reduce beauty to something that you can explain or define in terms of a naturalistic way. Like beauty is reducible to facial symmetry in terms of beauty in humans, right? Or something that you can, or harmony, right? Reduce it to the golden ratio or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, this is beauty, we've captured it, we've defined it, it's just the arrangement of, things in space kind of thing. That's okay as a start, but I don't think it does justice to the full experience of beauty and the power that it has over human beings. And so in that sense, I think, psychology maybe has a tendency to try and explain it. Like, what is going on in the human brain that makes us experience beauty, or what elements in the world that we see constitute beauty. And the assumption, obviously, is that all that we have to deal with is the human brain and, like, bits of matter in the world. Yeah. And, okay, if that's your worldview, but I would kind of want to push against that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for you, where is beauty sort of the most impactful in the realm of like humans? Because like obviously there's a certain level where in science there's a level in which beauty gets in the way or it can easily be explained. But where do you think what do you think beauty points to, and where do you think it's most influential, like in the embodiment of like humans and their lives?
Well, I think even in science it has its place. And if you read accounts of like actual famous scientists, that they are inspired by beauty often, whether it be the harmony of the cosmos or whether it be mathematical beauty. Now, I'm very bad at math, so I don't have experience of mathematical beauty. I never look at an equation and be like, that's beautiful. But I hear that people have that experience very commonly. And so it's like beauty is actually in there working as well. But, where else in humanity? I mean, I did mention religion before, and religion is always beautiful. I can't think of a religion that doesn't have beauty. Even very iconoclastic religions like Islam or traditional Judaism are full of beauty, whether that be the beauty of voice or whether that be the beauty of, even in visual art in Islam, which has a very strict prohibition on depicting living things, the arabesque patterns and the kind of pictorial art that they developed is just absolutely astonishing. So it's like, if you're dealing with religion, if you're dealing with something that's oriented to the transcendent, beauty always finds its way in. Even another good example might be Jainism, which is a somewhat obscure religion from India. It's somewhat like Buddhism, but more strict, more ascetic, more renouncing, right? And so, strict Jains won't eat root vegetables, for instance, because, they're too sentient in a way. And yet this very, very rigid, strict, and kind of renunciate religion has some of the most beautiful temples and even images of their kind of sages that you could imagine. And so it's like beauty will find its way in into anything that is dealing with the transcendent. It's almost impossible to stop it,
Yeah. Well, and I think there's something about that idea of like the way beauty points us to truth, which I think there's a lot of people who sort of in a modern frame would fight that, but there is something about, the way that beauty can point us to things that are more transcendent that we couldn't explain otherwise. And I think that's probably why you see it in some of all of these religions. There's pieces of truth that are getting embodied in the beautiful, and so there's obviously different levels of beauty within different expressions of religions, and different religions itself. There's all these different sort of expressions, but that's that sort of gut feeling that we can intuitively sense, even if we can't rationalize it, of like this sort of view of truth, I guess.
Yeah, a view of truth. I mean, and so obviously you've got the three transcendentals, traditional transcendentals: beauty, truth, and goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, they're all things that connect us to the divine. They're all things that connect us to the divine. And it seems that beauty has a particular grip on us that maybe truth and goodness don't have for everyone. It depends who you are as well, I think, personally, right? And some people have little resonance with beauty and much resonance with truth, just sort of like pure truth. But I think most people have a very visceral reaction to beauty. And I think it helps that beauty is usually, not an abstract mathematical equation, but something visual and something present, and maybe even something, physically tactile. And so it grips us. And that's really helpful, because if beauty is kind of coming from the transcendent, if it's coming from the divine, that's exactly what we need. We need to be gripped by that and directed towards that. And so I think that's why beauty is particularly helpful. And it's not elitist, really. I mean, modern art is very elitist, but that's because it's a degeneration of beauty, I would say, right? But beauty is very egalitarian. Beauty grips everyone. And especially if you're raised in a culture which has certain standards of beauty and you're acculturated into that, you recognize that, you're inspired by that, you're, contemplating that lifts, raises you a little bit at least, right? And so, I think beauty is indispensable in terms of seeking the transcendent, seeking the divine.
Do you think being raised Catholic, there's something sort of
right.
born into you to like acknowledge the beauty? Like I've heard people say, like even Scorsese, he talks about his sort of love for the image came from growing up Catholic and seeing all of these grand things. Like, do you ever feel like there's something in you?
Well, yes. Yeah, that's possibly a bias. So if I'm effusing about beauty, I do come from a Catholic background, and beauty is pretty central to Catholics. And so, but like I said, it's present in every religion. And I don't think, a faithful Muslim would deny that it's very present in Islam, and even in the ritual and the prayers and the Quran itself. In fact, for a Muslim, the Quran is itself a miracle because of its beauty. Which I don't know Arabic, so I can't appreciate it directly, but the claim is the Quran is so beautiful that it could not have been invented by a human being. So in that sense, it's central to that religion. And so, if it's as beautiful as they say, and, people memorize the whole Quran, and so it's like always just circulating and transforming them or something like that. So that was a bit of a tangent, but yes, I mean, growing up somewhat religious has to make you have a love for beauty, I think.
I mean, you've also done a lot of exploration in a lot of other religions too.
I mean, I kind of fell in love with, I fell in love with other religions before I fell in love with Christianity, actually, which is that interesting thing of you can't sort of appreciate the water that you're swimming in, you can't appreciate your own homeland until you go overseas and come back again, that whole thing. And so, I quite distinctly remember at the age of maybe 11 or 12, discovering Buddhism for the first time, and just my whole world opening up, my whole mind opening up. I had this little book sort of geared for teenagers, adolescents, about world religions, about Buddhism. I remember opening it up one morning and just sort of being transported by that and being like, I'm fascinated by this. I need to devour all the information I can possibly find about this, and just really being pulled by that. And it wasn't until later, until my early 20s, that I began to be able to look at Christianity in the same lens of like, actually, this is really beautiful. This is deeply beautiful and profound as well. Because for me, it's not an exclusionary thing. It's not like the beauty of Christianity nullifies the beauty of Buddhism or Islam or something like that. So
I think for you, you see a lot of sort of similarities, and like, I don't know, it seems like you try to integrate a lot of things within your faith. There's certain Christians who are sort of strict and isolated, but I think from my experience with you like to branch out and find ways to interweave all of these things together.
Well, I try to be sincere, so I try not to just believe something because I'm supposed to believe it. But I don't, there's dangers on both sides. There's dangers on the side of sort of blind dogmatism, and I think there's also dangers on the side of syncretism, in the sense of just in the sense of if you're just constructing a religion or a religious worldview just for you as an isolated ego, that's problematic as well, I think. That's a lot of what you see in sort of the New Age culture. And so I do try and, walk the line between those two. But at the same time, I want to be sincere. And so I don't want to believe in things or not believe in things just because I'm sort of supposed to, so to speak.
Right. Well, I think that's the trick, right? We're all born into families with religions or born into families without religions, which could be argued is still a religion, but
Yes,
that's another conversation. But I think there's that innate sort of pull where we don't want to believe the wrong things, and when we're handed a set of what is right and what is wrong, it's very easy to try to either find a way to fit within that frame and stay within the zone, or a lot of people rebel against it and do the opposite. And so there does take a lot of sort of ebbing and flowing to get to that place where it is an authentic thing, where it's not I'm not claiming to believe this because I have to or I should, but because through a life I've come to feeling it's the most true.
Right, yeah. I think it is. I think it has to be a whole being thing. It's not like just because you're taught the right doctrines, even if they happen to be absolutely true, it's not like just because you've been taught them and you've kind of passively assimilated them, that therefore you have truth. You don't have truth. You have something like correct opinion or something like that, which ultimately is useless if you stay with that, right? You need to be transformed by truth and beauty and goodness, which means you need to take ownership of them and you need to sincerely understand them as much as you can and be moving ever closer to truth, beauty, goodness, God, whatever you want to call it, right? So I mean, I don't think just doctrine is very useful, even if it's true, if you just stay with that, so
like there's something more like an embodiment of those things besides just like
I don't think truth is just correct belief. Let's put it that way, which is sort of more of a modern way of sort of thinking about that, as though you can do philosophy in an unembodied way. You can do philosophy purely academically. You can do philosophy, as a professor or a graduate student or whatever, and go home and sort of have a completely separated life from that. That's kind of meaningless. Now, obviously, in practice, I'm not saying philosophy professors are like this, right? Probably philosophy is their passion and it does transform their life. But there is sort of more of a tendency nowadays to think of it as just something that you do, sort of like in this compartment. And, it's not like it was for ancient Greeks and probably, certainly ancient Indians and virtually every culture I know of, where it's this entire committed way of living and experiencing the world and acting in the world. And that's what truth is. Truth is mystical, basically, is what I'm trying to get at, right? Truth is a mystical encounter with the divine.
A bunch of people.
Well, truth is mystical. I mean, otherwise I don't know how to explain it. Like, but yes, I do understand. It's a very different perspective to a lot of people. So yeah.
No, I appreciate it. No, I think there's truth in it. I think for myself, there's always sort of been this struggle between truth for me. Like, I think I came to religion probably in a more sort of mystical beauty first approach. As I look back and see my life and kind of put the pieces together. But when I think about sort of the way that I dedicated my life to it, it was this very truth first idea of like, well, I want to believe the things that are true. And once I have truth in place, everything else will sort of align. And it got me pretty far, and it helped me through a lot of things. And, it really opened my eye and it actually made me more open and probably less dogmatic in certain ways, although I don't think I was ever terribly dogmatic, but, maybe I had those tendencies. But I think, it just sort of, it started to flip everything on the head when I realized maybe this sort of truth first mentality was like put in the wrong place and doing a disservice to the way that I was actually living, and probably creating some cognitive dissonance where I do live most of my life being intuitively led to things and seeing things and trying to unpack them and understand why I feel the way I feel and if I should trust those things. And I think I think most modern people live in that world where, we want to know what's true, and we spend all our time, scouring the internet to have the right beliefs and what have you. And there has been sort of this, this whole mind shift when it's like, wait, if we can put beauty first and try to pursue that and let that sort of intuitive sense help us weed out the things that are not true.
Yes, yeah.
Like, you're just living a better embodied life. And you talk about philosophy being sort of separate. It does feel like in a lot of ways philosophy becomes a mental exercise of like, well, let's decide what it would look like in this world, and then sort of trying to predict, like it's prediction systems instead of really embodied living anymore. It's like a game.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of truth as a transcendental has kind of fallen since classical times, where, like you say, it's sort of about, I guess that would be more science, is sort of predicting, right? It's truth is about power over things. Truth is about predicting so that we can control things, in terms of science and technology, or it's kind of dry, kind of analytic philosophy, that doesn't have much of a deep metaphysics. It's just sort of takes a kind of version of what's popularly received as a scientific worldview for granted, namely that all that exists is material stuff, or whatever physics currently says. But instead of that, I would say that truth is actually truth. I mean, I would see the transcendentals, truth, beauty, and goodness as being sort of intertwined. I mean, I think that if you truly seek truth, you'll find beauty and goodness, right? And vice versa, and all of those things. And so, and going back to philosophy, philosophy is literally the love of wisdom, right? And so that's what it should be about. And that's when you read Plato, that's definitely what comes through, is that this is not a disembodied thing. This is not a matter of the head instead of the heart. It's very much a matter of the heart. It's about the passionate love of the highest good, of beauty, of wisdom, ultimately of God, you could say, if you want to give a kind of theological spin to that. And if you're thinking about things, but that's not drawing out that sense of love and awe and desire and wonder and so on and so forth, I don't think that's truth. Like, I don't think that's truth that you're coming near to. I think it's maybe it's a dim reflection or refraction of truth. It's probably in the truth category of things, but it's not. You're not close to the heart of existence, which is truth.
Yeah, no. In the book, the author was sort of talking about this idea of in a modern sense, we've idolized the rationale. Like, to be rational is the epitome of everything, and we've separated feelings and the rationale. And he kind of talks about in sort of more ancient cultures the idea that the head and the heart were separated, or is just not true. Like,
right.
the rationale comes from the heart, and so to deny the feelings and the heart, you're cutting off the source to be truly rational.
Right. Yeah.
And to me, that made so much sense. Like, when I really started to think about that and understand, you even look at children, the way that they process things, they're much more sort of emotionally driven, and there's a rationale in there somewhere, but it's not always, like, they can't always rationally speak that, and you have to go through this sort of irrational feeling phase to even get to the place to develop the rational capacities. And I think so often, I'm a rational person. I don't care about feelings. It's like it just cuts you off to the full embodiment of like what it is to participate and know these things in a real way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And the funny thing is that I do identify more with the rational myself. And so, for me, I mean, for my wife, for Alyssa, she's very much a feeling person, and sort of has to struggle to find the words to express her feelings, whereas for me, it's sort of like, I have to find the feelings to fill out the thoughts, so to speak. And so, so when I do talk about this, there isn't a sense of like I'm closer to that goal than anyone else. I'm probably a bit further away, but I think I therefore appreciate the importance of it, because I do have this tendency to want to systematize things, sort of like you talked about before, do I sort of bring different religions together? And I have a tendency to want to sort of systematize and understand exactly what's going on. But I actually find more and more as I live that is actually counterproductive, and it's a very dry way of approaching things, and it's useless as well, because if I'm not transformed, if I'm not a better person, and if I'm not closer to the divine in actual existence, then I could know exactly how the whole world works from top to bottom, and it would be absolutely useless. And then that brings the question: is could I know that exactly how the world is from top to bottom without being transformed? And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that this is an engaged and an embodied pursuit. We don't get truth cheaply, right? And so yeah, that's kind of how I'm trying to approach it, is in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think for myself, I'm naturally a feeler.
Right. Yeah.
I've always been very emotional. I'm naturally a feeler, but through sort of my religious pursuits and trying to get serious about that, I got to a certain place where I recognized just purely on my feelings wasn't sufficient. And not that I only used my feelings to participate in religion through my life, but just recognizing I didn't have a lot of strong reasoning of why I believed what I believed.
Right.
And, having to dismantle that and go back. So I almost had to teach myself the language of the rational.
Right.
And, try to understand and, sort of fell in love with philosophy and those things. And I think as I continued on, I think especially in the last year or so, I've just recognized how much a disservice I'm doing by not being able to allow myself to feel those things, because I think there was a lot of pressure in a certain way of, because I'm so emotional and because I can often I don't know if fly off the handle is the right word, but just feel. There was a certain level where I got the message that, well, I can't be rational and do those things.
Right.
And so I don't know, it's just been really mind-opening to like rework that way around. And I think when I was in this mode where I was sort of trying to stop off those things to think more rationally, it made me act in a life with fear.
Right.
Like there's always a fear of like, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I taking the wrong step? Am I like, and it was creating an environment that I was still growing. Like, and there was still good coming from it, but there was a level in which it wasn't couched with enough of that, that beauty and that peace that I think should come with a lot of these journeys. But I think a lot of people, they're struggling with that because we're misplacing like the way in which we should like work with these three. Because you're right, beauty, truth, and goodness, if you pursue any of those things at the top of your hierarchy, like it's going to lead to the others in different ratios. I just think it's so interesting, this idea of like, which I don't think is a modern frame, but like, what if you put beauty first and see how that then shaped everything else? But I think it gets kind of tricky because people think, oh, we're going into the realm of subjectivism, because what's beautiful for you might need to be beautiful for me, and vice versa.
It does seem that modern society kind of denigrates beauty, or at least is very limited. I mean, in a sense, you could say, in a very limited sense, modern society celebrates beauty more than any other, in the sense of just a very superficial, like physical beauty in terms of what you see on advertisements everywhere and so on and so forth, and just like the beauty industry as an industry. But of course, that's not what we're talking about. It's part of that. Like the beauty of the human form is one magnificent expression of the beauty itself. But what we're looking for is closer to the beauty itself. And so, in one sense, yes, we're sort of drenched in beauty, but in another sense, beauty has been robbed from us. Particularly with art, which doesn't really talk about beauty or care about beauty much. It cares about sort of, as far as I can tell, cleverness, right, and kind of that kind of very, very intellectual, very rational or intellectual or wordy kind of thing. But it doesn't really grip and inspire most people, right? so yeah, it could be really helpful to kind of have a beauty first approach. You know, I'm hesitant to say that that's the best. I mean, it certainly resonates with me because I think that each of these approaches can have like a negative side. Like yes, they all coincide if you pursue them truly and like perfectly, but you know, there's a fallen version of each of these, right?
Sure.
And we've talked about truth, which is kind of this kind of dull rationalism which never gets off the ground, right? And then, you know, maybe goodness, I don't know what goodness might look like, maybe something like just, you know, legalism or something like that, right? Just following the laws without any love in your heart, something like that. But then what does that look like for beauty? I mean, maybe it's just kind of aestheticism, or just like, you know, purely enjoying beauty without being transformed by it. Something like that, consuming or enjoying beauty, which we do to a large extent nowadays. So
I definitely think that sort of approach has the ability to lead to a type of hedonism.
yes,
right? You know?
I mean, because that's the thing, is that beauty is enjoyable. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about it, and it's wonderful if it can pull you closer to the divine and change your life for the better. But it's also got that danger, right? That danger if you stick with the lower forms, that you won't make any progress and you'll just be stuck. And this is very much, you know, this is very much on Plato's mind when he talks in the Symposium about, you know, the ladder of ascent to beauty. You start with the beauty of a human form, and then you sort of think about the beauty of the soul, and then you think about sort of abstract beauty, the beauty of the sciences, and then you get to the form of beauty itself, which is ultimately a mystical experience. But that's what it's all for. And then if you just stay with the beauty of the, you know, individual body, I mean, you haven't done what you're created for. You haven't, you know, you're not expressing much of your divine potential. You're just kind of languishing almost at the animal level, you know, which isn't to say that beauty doesn't have a part in life, but it has a part in a whole, a holistic life, which also includes the divine and also includes that transformational process.
I think it's so hard because I think so many people don't even have an understanding of what it means to participate in the divine,
right.
or
what
divine is at
right.
all. And
yeah.
like even the idea of beauty, well, what's beauty? What's
beauty?
truth?
Yeah.
You know, what's goodness? There's all of these sort of ambiguities. And I think a lot of people in our generation were not given the tools to be able to even know how to start tackling those things.
Absolutely.
Well.
No, I agree. And especially if you don't come from any kind of religious tradition, right? And don't have that kind of structure of the myths, the rituals, the stories, the songs, perhaps, the imagery. Because, you know, secular culture has its own versions of those things, obviously, but doesn't have the same orientation, perhaps, to the transcendent. And that's the problem. It sort of just sticks with the immanent. It just sticks with what we already have. But, you know, sort of thinking through that or past that, for me, something that's been really helpful is poetry. And sort of poetry is accessible to everyone. It doesn't have to be religious, although a lot of beautiful poetry is religious. And even religious poetry, like you can read the Psalms or you can read the book of Job and not be religious at all and not believe that any of it is true and still be moved by it. And then there's just a lot of secular poetry. I mean, my favorite poetry is, you know, from the Romantic period, where most of them are atheists, not all of them, but they're either atheists or they're like funny kind of theists or something like that, you know. But I mean, Shelley, for example, was very strictly atheist and kind of aggressively atheist, but had created some of the most beautiful, moving poetry and had some of the highest moral ideals, and kind of, in my view, is so connected to the transcendent that, for me, this is a pathway to that very same thing. So for me, poetry has been very helpful because it gives you the actual experience of what we're talking about in a way that's not, you know, it's usually quite noble, you know. And who nowadays wants to sit down and read poetry? I mean, you want to watch, you know, a TV show or something. You want to watch a Netflix series and have it all presented to you. With poetry, you have to sort of really, you know, think through what do these words actually mean. And I think that's part of it too, is the wrestling and grappling of what does this actually mean. But then you'll get moments where they just something shines forth from the page, or something shines forth, and you're like, this is a feeling that is so poignant or powerful, and how did it just come out of this arrangement of words? I've been connected to something. I've been transformed a little bit. I've been ennobled a little bit. So beauty in terms of poetry and probably in terms of art as well. You know, I've been getting into Renaissance art recently. Unlike my wife, I never did any art history classes. So I've been kind of getting into that on my own and sort of feeling my way into this wonderful period of kind of like exploration and development and finding different ways and better ways to express the divine in art.
Yeah. Well, I mean, art for me, it's always a thing that I'm wrestling with and questioning with as an artist myself. Like, I don't know if everybody thinks of filmmaking as an art, but like it is in a certain level.
Yeah.
And so there's always that question of like, what are you creating, and how are you using that creation to, I mean, how are you being intentional with that, and what are you saying? And sometimes I overanalyze it and get caught in my head, but I think there's something about the creation that there's a level of integrity as artists that you have to think about. And I think as far as sort of non-religious people, often our movies become sort of the modern mythologies in these sort of religious stories in a certain way. You know, you look at the Marvel films, they're telling you something about humanity. They're giving you these things, and I don't think people intentionally see them as the way maybe a religious person would see religious stories, but they act in some of those same ways. And I've been wrestling recently with just the idea of sort of Christian films.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so you've got these sort of companies that are dedicated to making sort of Christian films. And I think there's sort of a, I guess it gets character that they're all crappy.
Right.
You know, there's something missing. They're not great, I guess.
And what do you think is the missing piece?
Well, I have complicated thoughts about this, because on one hand, I think it's a false characterization, because you look at Hollywood and you look at all of these other, places where film is being made, and there's crappy films everywhere.
Right.
And so as much as there's crappy films in sort of religious sects, there are also crappy films in others, and not every religious film is crappy. Like, there are some, but you also have to look at budgets. You have Hollywood films getting hundreds of millions of dollars in budgets and whatever, and you've got these sort of smaller Christian studios that are getting maybe $1 million, so there's a level in which, it still sounds like a lot of money, but when it comes to the art and what it really takes to produce something, it's actually not a lot of money. But I think there's another level in which a lot of these sort of Christian filmmakers are not filmmakers. They're pastors or preachers or ministry people who want to make a difference in culture and decide, I'm going to make a movie. And so...
So that you, in the terminology we've been using, you could say that they're goodness first. That's what's driving them. They're not beauty first.
I think goodness first, or like even truth first. So like, and maybe sort of this weird crossbreed where it's like, goodness is truth and whatever. But I think that's like, goodness first. Like, we want to have wholesome, good films that share the love of God. And I think what ends up happening is you lose sight of like the complexity of what it really is to be human.
Right, yeah.
Where, sometimes you get caricatures of people, and, and it's, I think as human beings, there is something in us that is drawn to caricatures.
Right, yeah.
You look at the Christian films that get the most money coming in, it's something like God's Not Dead 3, where it's just like it's very clear what the message is. And I think there's a lot of that where what's the goal of making films? Is it to bring people to Christ? Well, there you go, you see something like that, and maybe it's not technically a good film from a sort of perspective from a filmmaker, but it's creating a movement towards what people would say is salvation. But then there's a tricky question of like, what does it really mean to be saved, and how long term are some of these things. You can check numbers of people who came to the front of a movie theater and gave their life to Christ, but what does that mean in the long term?
Yeah, it seems like a somewhat utilitarian approach, right? You're just sort of producing this for a specific purpose, which might be very noble, might be a very noble purpose, but it's not for the sake of the beauty of the art itself, which is, maybe, I don't know if this is true, but maybe Dostoevsky is one of the greatest apologists in terms of drawing people to Christianity, just because of the complexity of his characters, and that he's able to articulate some of the greatest, most forceful arguments against Christianity, being Christian himself, and also present you with images of, why Christianity might be compelling in really complex and nuanced ways. And you could argue that actually would have a deeper and a more lasting effect than something that was dealing with only caricatures, right? There's a good character, there's an evil character, there's, it's as simple as that kind of thing.
Well, it's definitely a slower approach too. Russian novels are.
Well, it could also be part of the ideology of the culture as well, right? It's a matter of conversion versus gradual transformation. I mean, if all you need is to get people to convert, then that's, you can be a bit utilitarian with that, because you only need to get people to a certain threshold. But if what you need is complete transformation, let's say theosis, if we're going to jump into sort of orthodox jargon, if you want theosis, then only the deepest form of beauty is going to, call to those depths. Yeah. Otherwise, anything short of that is not going to inspire. So.
Yeah, well, it's such an emotional thing for me, because I want to be in support of it, right? I want to be like, that's great that like I understand what you're trying to do, and like as a Christian myself, of course I think it's true. At least, obviously there's a lot of theological differences and nuances you'd argue, but like the idea of Christ and that being able to save, I think that is true. And like a lot of the messaging, like, well, they're great messages, yet there's the filmmaker in me, and it's like, but what is it saying when we don't do the diligence to create the highest quality thing we could?
Right, yeah.
And like, why aren't we spending the time? Like, it's almost frustrating to see something that is mediocre, but placed on this pedestal where it's like the greatest thing I've ever seen. Like, there's so many Christians like, oh, it's the best movie ever, and I watch it. I'm like, were we watching the same movie?
Right, yeah.
It's like, I don't want to just support something because, a Christian did it and it has a good message. It's like, I want a higher standard, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think there is something where it's like, there is something to beauty, and like, it's so much deeper than just like the imagery. It's like character development and like full embodiment, and just like, in some ways, the representation of reality in like these beautiful, creative ways. And I don't know.
I think that's another case of, the beauty leads you to truth as well. And so to get to the deepest truth, you do need really deep beauty. You don't need sort of superficial beauty that's just enough to sort of entice. But, having said that, I haven't seen many of these Christian films that you're talking about, which is maybe a good thing. I don't know. So I can't really say. I mean, have you watched The Chosen yet?
I have watched The Chosen. It's my boyfriend's favorite
What's
TV
your
show.
opinion on that?
I think it's better than a lot of other Christian media. There are times I'm rolling my eyes. Like, okay, but no, I think there is something interesting. But I think as it goes on too, there's certain ways, like they're writing real characters. They're creating stories, and it doesn't. Like, I think sometimes just sort of these movies that are trying to wrap a sermon into like a movie, it kind of feels like propaganda.
Yeah.
And so it's like maybe it'll move people and get people to feel emotional, but like there's not a depth that like resonates like to the core of people and is moving. I definitely think The Chosen has. I mean, it definitely has an agenda and like a motive, but every film does. Like, we can't argue that. But I do think the way they did a lot of things, you really get a deeper sense of like the inner stories. And it's kind of like in my conversation with Alyssa, talking about these sort of biblical fictions, where it's like you feel, you get a sense a little bit more of what it would be like to live in that and through that.
Absolutely, yeah. And the complexity of the characters, which I think is exactly what you're saying, right? They really give all the characters complexity. I mean, we've only just been introduced to Judas, but my sense is that Judas is also a very complex, partly good, partly bad human being. Even Jesus is, the laughing Jesus, which is not a Jesus we usually get to see, or maybe they do put that in a lot of films.
There was one, so I grew up watching all of these like Christian movies and stuff, like the Jesus movies and like the tribulation movies, all this stuff. And I don't remember most of them. I remember Mr. T was in one of them, and then Howie Mandel was in one of them too. These are the things I remember from this time period. But there was one Jesus movie where they portrayed Jesus as sort of this laughing, jolly person. And I don't remember which one it was, but I remember that because it was very stark from a lot of these sort of serious Jesus.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, that can certainly go too far, but my sense with The Chosen was he can laugh and joke, but he's sober as well, right? He's got both of those, and that's really appealing because it's hard. I would think it's hard to depict Christ in a way that's really compelling because of who he's supposed to be, which is essentially sinless and divine, right? Like a lot of what endears us to human characters is the fact that they're flawed and right? Like damaged and relatable, especially like tragic heroes, right? Like, so I can see it must be really hard to portray Jesus, and so I like what
I wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't think I could take on that task. Like even given, you can do a Jesus movie.
I
don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think especially it's just the moving image. There's so much power in it.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want that responsibility.
Fair enough. Yeah.
But I don't know. It's very interesting. Like there's so many out there. One of the sort of Christian films that I did actually like was The Case for Christ.
I haven't seen that.
So it was about Lee Strobel. I didn't like his book. I thought it was kind of, but he's like an apologist and went from atheist to Christian, and I thought the film was actually really well done. There were definitely moments where I was like, okay, well, you're losing me a little bit, but no, I think overall like it was really good, but I think it was just really character driven.
Okay.
And like you get this full sense. You don't just see him as this like evil, awful guy. Like there's just this complex sense, and the way that it was written, it weaved the things in more naturally. And so I don't even know exactly who did all those. I know Pureflix was part of it, but I don't know who was the director or the writer or all of those things. And they had good actors too. Like Erica Christensen was like the wife in it. She was in Parenthood and a bunch of other stuff. But like she's just a really great actress.
Right.
And there's something about that, being able to embody these things and make it feel real.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And it's just really hard to do, and I think that's where it's in one way I can give slack because there's people just trying going out and making films, but like the idea of what it is to make a film and to actually be good and proficient and make a good film is really difficult.
Right. Yeah.
It's not what you would think, and so I don't know, it's just such that fight within me. My family always gets on my case about being, because I'm always like, they're kind of heavy-handed and whatever, and so I get dragged to them, and then they ask my opinions, and I try to like couch it, and like, but I don't know. I don't know what the right thing is. Should I be more like understanding and more sort of forgiving? But I think there's another part of me that's like, as a filmmaker, like there's a point where you gotta challenge the thing that we're getting. Yeah. Because that's the only way we're ever gonna be better at that craft. And like, if beauty is important and film can embody beauty in this art form, like how do we get better at that?
Yeah. I mean, and that's right. And it doesn't have to be a conflict, I wouldn't think. It's like beauty. Again, beauty is God, perhaps, or at least a manifestation of God. So, going towards that beauty, the highest beauty that you can grasp, and then and then instantiating it in your art or whatever you do. Has to be good, at least that's what I would say. So, and it will partake of goodness and truth, naturally, I think. Again, as long as your attention to what your attention to beauty is relatively pure, because like I've said, you can get lower kinds of beauty and things like that. But yeah.
Well, it's interesting in the somewhere in the Torah, you talk about, or maybe just somewhere in the Old Testament, they talk about wisdom in different ways. And one of the ways when these carvers were coming and building the temple, they were using wisdom to create these things. And I think in some ways we've lost that sense of like wisdom is more than just sort of like philosophical knowledge, but there's something about the wisdom of using your hands and creating that like can be divinely inspired or point towards the divine. And I think for myself, it's like there's a certain level where we should aspire, like as filmmakers and people of faith, like you should aspire to let that thing be like the highest of the high. And it's hard when the sort of more cultural perception of that is cheesy movies.
No, absolutely. I mean, and you highlight another aspect of it, right? It's not just that you're inspired by beauty to create it, but the creativeness itself is divine. Like, I would say that's part of the image of God in us, is our ability to create and to create beauty. Right, we can bring beauty into the world. That's not nothing, right? Before there was not this beauty, and now there's this beauty, and it's not like it just sits there and does nothing. But people are enriched by it, and nourished by it, and transformed by it. So, yeah, like you say, I love what you said about wisdom, and wisdom being that creativeness, and I would say wisdom being divine as well, and wisdom being Sophia, which brings us to the feminine divine. But yeah, absolutely. That's our role, and I think that's our role as creatures as well, or the creatures that we are, which is, in the myth of Eden, is the creatures that are kind of priests for all of creation and mediators with God. And part of that is, lifting creation up to God, but part of that is also, channeling is maybe the wrong word, but yeah, in a sense, channeling God's creative energies into creation as well. We're supposed to tend the garden. That means we're actually supposed to work creatively with our hands to beautify and bring out the best of creation. That's our role. So, yeah, art, being artistic or being creative, and that can apply to like anything too. That also brings us closer to the divine. And again, like I think it applies to anything. It doesn't mean that you have to have a specific artistic talent per se, because you can creatively love someone. You can think of the best possible way to be there for them in a particular moment. That is literally divine and creative, and it's creating something in them. It's creating some hope or some comfort that wasn't there before. So, yeah, I'm getting swept away on that thought. So I'll just leave that
I
there.
liked it. No, yeah. I think there's truth to that, where we are creating in so many different ways. Like, and I think when we lose sight of the fact that every day we are creating and doing things, we get lost in the monotony of our everyday, and to change that framework and really think about that creative aspect of putting out life into the world.
Oh, absolutely.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easy to get lost in the everyday.
Yeah.
And I think, but part of that is also that we do fall into that routine, and we stop being creative, and I'm not immune to this. I do this every day, it's just I do the same things. And it's funny because time seems to sort of disappear, or not disappear, but it sort of just seems to get smaller and smaller. Like, a day of doing the same routine thing just feels like it hasn't been. Like, what did I do during that day? But a day full of creative, engaged activity, or a day full of creativity or appreciation of art or beauty is full. It's full with what it should be. So I think that we can bring that to everyday actions as well. Like, again, like, what is the most creative way that I can be here? Like most creatively loving way might be a better way to put it, of being here with this person at this time who I'm here with anyway. Or what's the most creative way that I can do whatever, do the dishes, right? Because again, you can do it suddenly with a distracted mind, or you can do it kind of mindfully with a sense of, I try and cultivate gratitude. So, like, I'm thankful for these dishes, or I'm thankful for this food that I'm about to eat. I'm thankful for this chair that I sit on, I might not have a chair. We didn't used to have furniture. We used to sit on the ground. So, like you can really appreciate everything and engage with everything in that loving way.
Yeah.
And that's another point. I think love itself is creative, like the way you attend to something. And that brings beauty back into the conversation too, because look, if I can see the beauty in something, then I'm already looking at it in a loving way. And if I have to engage with it or interact with it or be active with it in some way, that's going to be creative. Now that's really obvious when it comes to a person. And that's why beauty is so important. Even exterior beauty is so important because, we all know we act differently around more attractive people, which is not ideal, right? Because we should ideally act that way around everyone because everyone is divinely beautiful. But obviously, in our fallen state, that's the way things are because it's the beauty of the soul shining through the body. And, even in someone who's like really messed up and like malicious and so forth, it's like, yeah, you can still, maybe if you try really hard and have the right attention, you can actually see a glimpse of the goodness in them.
Mm.
And so that creative attention, that love, we've talked about beauty, goodness, and truth, and in a way that's kind of a very Greek way of thinking, which is great. Greeks, Greek philosophy has given us so much, and then of course love comes into that. Love for say Plato is eros, love of beauty. And it's really interesting because in the Symposium, love itself is not divine. He really makes a point of saying that. Love is a daimon, or love is this in-between creature, maybe an angel or something, but maybe not an angel because an angel is kind of perfect in a way. But yeah, a daemon. Like love is something between humans and gods, between mortals and divine, because eros is incomplete, because eros is yearning for something. The feeling of love is that we're incomplete, we're yearning for something. And so that's very much the way that, Greeks thought about love as eros, right? It's very beautiful, it's uplifting, it's bringing us closer to something. But obviously, certainly to Plato, to Aristotle, we're reading into it a little bit, but I would say it would be safe to say that when they arrive at the thing they're looking for, beauty or God, so Aristotle has a God. God moves the whole universe because the whole universe is in love with him. It literally moves the universe because he just is. But this Aristotelian God doesn't have any particular relationship with the universe. It didn't create the universe. It doesn't love the universe. It doesn't love anything. It can't love anything because it's perfect itself. Mm-hmm. And so this is just a long way of getting around to agape, right? To the Christian notion of love, which is that outpouring of creative attention, let's say. Which is, I think, needs to be added to when we talk about beauty, truth, and love and the desire that leads us there. We also need to think about how does agape fit into that. And I don't know exactly how. I've sort of outlined some ways that might fit in. Again, like trying to see the deepest beauty in someone means that you're going to be creatively loving towards them. But, there's a kind of the experience of desire, because eros is both translated as love and desire, but the experience of desire is kind of noble, but it's also kind of negative in a way. Like it's bad. Like it's like, especially if your desire is for a lower thing rather than a higher thing. You could say eros for God is only noble, but eros for like something bodily is, maybe not entirely ignoble, but it has an experience of being bound or trapped or confined or, locked into something that you would otherwise not, you would otherwise be free from. The experience of agape, whenever we experience it, is almost like we have this abundance within ourselves, right? That we can give, we can outpour to others, and that's not, and paradoxically, that's not prideful. That's not selfish, like I am divine or something like that, especially if you have that sense of abundance because of your humility, your gratefulness, your relationship with God, your gratefulness even for other people, right? Like I think even that can instill that in us, right? I've received so much, that I don't deserve from others, just gratuitously, just kindness that I didn't deserve or ask for. Really just sitting in that awareness what does it make me want to do? It makes me want to share that further and be gratuitously kind to others too. So how does that relate to beauty exactly? I'm not sure, but I feel like it's something else we also need to keep in mind when we're thinking about those things.
Well, I think all of those things, beauty, goodness, and truth, like they add to this ability to love.
Yes. Oh, they do.
It's,
Yes.
They draw us into love, and I think in some ways beauty is it's the fastest way to fall in love, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
But without truth and goodness, there's not a depth to those things.
Yeah. If truth and goodness aren't participating in that, then you're dealing with a very low and fallen kind of beauty. That's right. But yeah. It's like I said. It's the most. It seems to be the most gripping kind of aspect of the transcendent, because again, if you see beauty shining forth in something, it grips your attention, it inflames your desire, and then it's what you do with that matters, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated dance, and I think we're all, whether we're intentionally doing it or not, trying to figure out the way to participate in that, and it shapes our lives so much. And I do think there's probably some importance in trying to be more intentional with that dance and see how to fit those all together well.
Yeah.
Were there any questions that you had specifically about beauty and that you're pondering?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many. I did jot down a few things that I might want to touch on, so I'll just see if there's anything that jumps out at me. Oh boy.
You're the first guest who brought notes, I feel.
Yeah. One thing, there might be a couple, but one thing certainly that I wanted to touch on is, and this is I'm getting this partly from David Bentley Hart, and partly from a philosopher named Berdyaev, who was a Russian early 20th century Russian philosopher, Orthodox philosopher, although kind of controversial, but so I was reading a book by David Bentley Hart. This is his book called The Experience of God, where he puts forth his best arguments for God, some of which are more philosophical and some of which are actually arguing from the transcendentals, right? To have truth, to have goodness, to have beauty as phenomena, we need them, they are grounded in this ultimate reality, which is God. And so when he talks about beauty, to describe it, because it's very hard to define beauty. So, to prepare for this, I was sort of like, can I define this? And ultimately, I don't think I can. We know it when we see it, right? It's one of those things that we know it when we see it. And it's not something that we can reduce to a formula. Yes, maybe it involves harmony in some respect. But, if we get really specific and define that, we always find pretty glaring exceptions to that, So he talked about it. It's an experience of, in one sense, it's an experience of the transcendent shining through creation, and in another sense, it's got this particular quality of gratuity. Like I talked before about, in terms of agape, right? If I receive gratuitous love, where I feel that I don't actually deserve that, I did not actually ask for that or seek that out, that's enlivening to me. And I think likewise, there's a sense with beauty where it just is. It just is. And it's like, I can't reduce it. I can't explain it. I can't reduce it to something useful or something, a set of proportions or among its parts or something like that. It just is. And it so clearly is something important and meaningful and powerful. And the gratuity of that transcendence is just so gripping. And so for him, it's that shining of the transcendent through creation, through the physical forms of creation. And every now and again, creation will give us those glimpses. I mean, the natural world, looking at the natural world is full of this. And obviously artists can have this amazing ability to create forms that also elicit that. That's my experience with poetry and with a lot of music as well, is that suddenly through the forms of these words and the associations, this feeling or this insight or this sense will just stream right through that. It's really quite interesting. And so he also talks about, this is more drawing from his book, the gates of the sea. And he wrote this. It's sort of his theodicy. He wrote it in response to the tsunami. I think it was the 2004 tsunami that killed thousands of people across Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Because a lot of Christians were sort of saying that somehow everything is God's will, everything that happens is God's will, we don't understand it. And he really wanted to push back against this idea, particularly from an Orthodox perspective too, because he's an Eastern Orthodox theologian. Where he's like, no, evil in the world is never God's will, right? Evil is a result of the fallen world. It's not a result of God's plan. And at the end of creation, all these evil stuff that happen, I mean, God can use them for good, but he doesn't will them. He doesn't want them to be. They'll be seen for what they are, which is sort of nothing, right? Like a falling away into the depths of chaos and nothingness. And so I was also reading about Berdyaev's view on this as well, which is that, you know, the natural world does have a certain harmony. It does have a certain beauty that's compelling. And in a sense, that comes from God, because everything that's good and positive comes from God. But we shouldn't get too attached to that, because the beauty of the world is also the harmony of life feeding on life and destroying life, and the terrible, almost senseless suffering of animals and all kinds of sentient creatures, which is part of the beauty. Well, it's part of nature, but it's the horrific part of nature, and it's the cancer that destroys the people that we love most dearly, and it's all the terrible parts of life. And so David Bentley Hart and certainly Berdyaev, they really want to push back against this notion of, you know, we have to accept this if we want to accept the beauty of the natural world. And he says, you know, Berdyaev particularly says that there's two worlds. There's the cosmos as God intended it, as he created it. And in a sense, it didn't stop existing with the fall. It kind of exists now in some transcendent form, in some transcendent sense. And it's exactly what shines through the natural world when we do see it, right? But the harmony of the natural world, you know, is not... We don't want to adapt ourselves to that, right? We don't want to just feel at home in this world. We don't want to be okay with death and suffering, right? We want to appreciate the natural beauty of the world, but we want that to then lift us to this transcendent realm where there is no suffering, where there is no death. Now, how plausible that is, I don't know. I feel like you really need a mystic sense to actually appreciate what that could be. Could the natural world even exist without suffering and death? Is like, what does heaven look like, is basically what this question comes down to.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I can't imagine it. But there is something beautiful and compelling in that sense of, yeah, you've got true beauty, and we catch glimpses of it through the physical things of the world. But it's not the world itself that we should love. It's the things that are beyond the world, which is the divine things, the things in the mind of God, you know, which again is tying in Platonism a little bit, right? Because beauty is like a form. Beauty is just, you know, these are forms in the mind of God, or something like that. So, yeah, thoughts or questions on that little stream?
No, I think it's all very interesting. I think the idea of like death and life is so important in at least Christianity, but probably a lot of religions, but I think especially in Orthodox, like it's that's sort of the frame, right? It's not sort of all this judgment and payment for sin. It's death and life, and sin brings death into the world, and there is sort of this beauty of not saying that death itself is a good, but by embracing death, and seeing that we believe that God can overcome that and then bring an eternal life.
Yes.
And I think there's so much in our culture that is doing everything it can to prevent death.
Yes.
I mean, we even look at some of the COVID restrictions and all of those things, not to make any judgments about them, but they're really about death numbers and disease and preventing that. And I do think it loses some of the sense of what does it mean to have a fully beautiful life that's fully embodied.
Right.
And I do think it creates this fear and this obsession of death, where we really should be saying, well, how do we gain life as opposed to just avoiding death?
Well, you know, in a sense, I think it's very Christian, or maybe I should say Judeo-Christian, the sense of like, I want to be immortal and I want to escape death, you know, because it's not, what you're not saying is, I want to be part of nature and I want to be part of the great cycle, and that I'm just going to give up my body. Yeah. The difference, of course, is that it is that does not take place in the transcendent realm. That is it's the only immortality we could get is physical. So we need to protect ourselves at all costs from death. We need to find a way to overcome, death basically, and aging and things like that. And so it's this funny. It's not anti sort of religious or anti Judeo-Christian, but it kind of is as well, because it doesn't have the transcendent. And I like what you said, because obviously death is central to the structure of Christianity, but only if you forget the resurrection. So the whole idea is that evil and suffering and death is used to overcome it. And so the ultimate end point is never to accept it, but to overcome it. But and this is an important point, the way to get there is by voluntarily accepting it. Yeah. And that's basically the structure, I think. But there's another kind of, maybe more pagan kind of religion, which also doesn't have such an obsession or a neurosis about living forever, but actually tries to integrate humanity and oneself in the natural cycles. And, if we're particularly neurotic about death, which we are, that can look really appealing. But I think that's probably a mistake as well, that we shouldn't reconcile ourselves to death and suffering. Because, I would say that is betraying our humanity just as much as maybe trying to physically, at all costs, live forever is also trying to betray our humanity.
Right.
So yeah.
I think it's hard. I think most Westerners and most people living in modern societies are materialists. Like even sort of religious people.
Yeah.
Like I say about myself, I think I'm a recovering materialist, where even though I would never have called myself a materialist and said all I believed was space, time, and matter, and that's all there is. I believed in some supernatural. I never truly acted as if that were true.
Right.
And I think when you're in that frame, there is just a much easier place to get caught up in this negative cycle of death and how to fight it. And, the way to embody it. And I think it's probably just part of humanity. Like there's something wired in us to think on those terms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's in me too, right?
Yeah.
That materialism is kind of a default view for me, even though I'm sort of sound so convinced by the opposite. It's very much ingrained, and it's very much a sense of, if I really let myself just think what I sort of basically believe, it's sort of like, okay, of course I'll just cease to exist when I die or something like that. But there's a lot of evidence against that point of view. And so I know that it is something that kind of came to me through the culture, the sense that, of course everyone just ceases to exist when they die. So it's something, I really have to wrestle with and fight as well. There was one other point that I thought maybe it could be interesting to bring up, which actually goes against what I was talking about, because I like to do both sides, right? But
contrarian.
Yeah, because I was kind of just listening to the old Chill Step mix on YouTube or something. They put a lot of Alan Watts in. I don't know if you know who Alan Watts is. He's kind of like this hippie type philosopher from the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, something like that, who kind of really brought Eastern philosophy into the mainstream in the West. And he's really quite lovely. Like, but I definitely disagree with him in a lot of things too. But he really makes this point that a lot of the most beautiful and powerful art deals with the transitory, deals with the passing away, and actually deals with death. And to me that's very true. Some of the most powerful poems are about death and involve death, and a lot of Japanese aesthetics tends to focus on the transitory and the passing away and things like that. And so he was just kind of emphasizing that actually this is itself beautiful. This is not, because his point of view would be, yes, reconcile yourself to the cycles, right? And know that you are transitory and know that you are passing away, and that this itself is enough. This itself is beautiful. And so I just find that a very curious thing, because in one sense, beauty seems to point to the eternal, and that was certainly true for Plato. It's the eternal, unchangeable form of beauty. It's right, but there's also a sense in which some of the most beautiful things are the momentary and the passing away, and things tinged with sadness and regret and poignancy and loss, tragedies, humans are very fascinated by and feel the beauty of tragedy as a genre. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that, and how does that fit into the picture?
So my mom used to be a grief counselor for years and years and years,
Mm-hmm.
and so I have a interesting relationship with death. I wouldn't say I'm enthralled by it necessarily, but I'm very intrigued by it. I think there's such a beauty in learning what it means to face death and embrace death. And she worked for hospices, so sort of the palliative care of like people accepting the idea that they're
Yes.
going to die and not
Yeah.
trying to treat their illnesses, but just dying as comfortably as they can. And I think that experience really shaped this idea that there is a beauty in this voluntary acceptance of death. And I, in some ways I see it very Christian, as we talked about, but there is something of like being willing to say, the fight in which we get into and sort of this modern frame of doing everything we can to prevent us from having a life that ended. Like, I think there are some good to it, but there's certain extremes where most people spend their last years, months of their life being poked and prodded and
Right.
losing sight of what truly is beautiful.
Right.
And I do think having a religious frame and believing there is something after this makes it easier to kind of say that and think, well, as much as death is not beautiful, like we fear it, we loathe it. Like, I do think that at the end, at the other side, there will be a beauty that comes from it. And to see that, we have to die. And so...
So maybe the beauty of the transitory then for you, it sounds like it's real, it's there, but it's only a penultimate kind of beauty. There's a deeper kind of beauty which is in eternity, something like that.
The only reason it's beautiful is because it's redemptive, right?
Right. Yes. Right. Yeah. That
Like,
makes sense.
Death for death itself is,
Right.
that's ridiculous.
Right.
It's
Okay.
absurd.
Yeah.
But like death to give you life, which
Yeah.
in some ways, like hospice, that's what they're doing. They're embracing death to have life in the last month that they have left.
Yeah.
And that idea of like us, as a Christian going into death, tying our horse to Jesus, who's this visual representation of a promise of life after this. If he rose, then we will too. I don't know. There's a beauty that comes with death, and you're able to take it on like as much as we can. And I don't want to say sinful, but the sort of distorted part of our humanity, it wants to hold on to this lesser version of life,
Right.
and prevent death as much as we can. But like in some ways, we can dislike death but embrace it to then give us life.
Yeah.
And so there's this weird paradox that happens.
Yeah. And so then death and transitoriness and eternal life are both beautiful. Of course, the highest is the eternal.
Yeah.
And if the transitory participates in beauty, it's because it's redemptive, or at least it can be redemptive.
Yeah. Well, and like for myself, I think the most beautiful story, as a Christian, the most beautiful story is the story of Jesus.
Yes.
And what makes his story so beautiful? It's the death. It's
Right.
that he voluntarily accepted death.
Yes.
The most undeserving of those.
Yes.
But it doesn't end there, right?
Yes.
Like he's brought back to life, and he's fulfilling this promise that, potentially has been promised for thousands and thousands of years before, like from Genesis 1, 2, and 3, the snake crusher whose heel is bitten, but brings life and creates that life not just for this small group of people in the ancient Middle East and onward, but all nations.
Right. I mean, it really combines, because without the resurrection, it's a tragedy, and it would be a beautiful tragedy too, right? Like it would be one of the
Yes.
finest tragedies.
Yes.
And then with the resurrection, it's this kind of triumphal story as well. And so it really does combine the two. And so there's almost, to me, there's a sense that maybe, Jesus did entertain the notion that he was going to be annihilated on the cross. Like there's a sense in which he went to the darkest and lowest place that a human being can go, right? Within the framework of orthodoxy, you would say without sinning, fair enough. But, you know, how dark can you go before you do sin? I mean, my favorite philosopher, Simone Weil, my favorite modern philosopher, talks about this too. You know, she really focuses on the cross, and she doesn't talk much about the resurrection. And there is an interesting paradox in it, because it's like, if I accept death, am I really accepting death if I actually know that I'm going to triumph and I'm going to like destroy all my enemies and I'm going to rise from the dead, you know? And there is this darkness on the cross where Jesus says, "Why have you forsaken me?" to God, which I think almost hints at the sense that, you know, there was a sense that maybe this is all going to be for nothing, and his ability to embrace that for like the pure good itself, or something like that, or even for pure beauty itself, maybe, right, is the powerful aspect of it, and it's almost that gives the life, that gives the resurrection, something like that. I don't know if you sort of...
Well, I mean, I think through the Gospels, it's clear that Jesus struggled with the idea of death, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know. And
I mean, tears of blood or sweat of blood, yeah.
And just that, if you can take this cup from me, take it.
Yes.
So there's something in that where it's, I don't think it
There's
is a sin to not want the death, yet
Yes.
there is something where it's like, we have to take, in some ways, there are times we have to take the death to then get life.
Oh, absolutely,
And,
yeah.
I mean, it's so hard I think for me, it's so hard to talk about the cross without the resurrection, because
Right.
it can become sort of like weird torture porn.
No, I agree. I mean, I think there's certain people that psychologically are set up where they can do that. I think Simone Weil might have been one of them. I think that you have examples of saints maybe that are similar to that, where they really do focus on the death and the suffering and the cross aspect, and they manage to do it, I think, probably without being, you know, despairing from that.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, right, and for you, I can't do that, because it would be too easy to just lose all hope and all kind of sense of value in life if I was just,
Well, I think there's one sense where to accept death without any certainty that there will be something at the end, just for the sense that it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
Like, there's still a value in that. And like, I think we all face that, because when it comes to faith and an embrace of Jesus, like, there is a sense where we don't know for certain that this death is going to lead. We have a hope, and we have a belief and a trust in that. But we go into death, you know, even if it doesn't end up bringing that extra life, because it's the right thing to do. And I think there's a value in that. But, you know, I think the more beautiful story is that redemption and that hope that something is coming after. And maybe it's all wishful thinking, but I do think that there is something so beautiful about that, and something that I do believe is true, but even if I had trouble believing that was true, would want to be true. I think all of us do.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you talk about sort of the, my God, why have you forsaken me? That I don't know, it's just that reminder of how steep Jesus was within the scriptures, because that's coming from a psalm itself. And when you read that psalm, you see the portrait of the suffering servant, and you see the reflections of what Jesus is going through, and how that reflects what would have been the promise of a messianic figure. And a lot of people argue that is sort of a messianic prophecy within that psalm. And so there's something there where it's like, on the face of it, it's like we can think, oh, Jesus didn't even know himself that this was going to come true. But I think, I don't know, I think he was doing something deeper. He was pointing deeper and subverting his messages in a way.
I think, I don't know if I entirely would agree with that, but I think that
I don't know if I would either.
Right, yeah. But you're certainly right about the psalm, right? And that's the context to that statement that a lot of people don't realize, is that it's, you know, it's a piece of scripture. But you know, you could say that, you know, I mean, let's go back to the hope that you have in eternal life, right? When you when you are coming near to death, and depending on what kind of death that will be, you know, you'll have that hope, but probably, you know, that hope won't be in your body because your body will be suffering, and maybe not even in your soul because your soul will be filled with anguish because you're human, and like Jesus was sweating tears of blood, sweating blood. Was he crying blood or sweating blood?
I think it was sweating
blood, yeah. You know, you will also have that abhorrence of death. And so it's like, there's maybe like one pinpoint in your soul or in your spirit, let's say, like the very core of you that still has that hope. And all the rest is, you know, drowned in suffering. And you could say that was maybe the point where Jesus got to, and that was the critical point, was that there was darkness everywhere except this one central point which would not let go of loving God, something like that. And that allowed the victory. Because it would be very easy to just let that go and despair and that, you know. And so I think that there's something very subtle there, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly how I will be when I'm truly faced with death. I would hope I can face it with grace, but I'm a human, and so
I'll be terrified. I'll be
there's a lack in me, but I guess my hope is that whatever is bigger and more divine can fill that lack and meet me where I am wanting.
And people do seem to get that grace, right, when they're coming near to death. And that's something I left out. It doesn't have to be horrible, as some people seem to get the sense of even Carl Jung talked about this with a lot of his patients who are coming near death. He would be like, they're not that worried about it. They have this intuitive sense that their life is going to continue in some way after death, and that, you know, and you get all kinds of phenomena around death, right? You get terminal lucidity, where some people who even have had severe brain damage or dementia become lucid again in the moments before their death. So there's all these interesting phenomena that go around that. But we've strayed somewhat from beauty now, I fear.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's probably some way that it intertwines, but I don't know. It's I heard someone say recently, the only thing that we are guaranteed is death. It really is the only thing that everyone will experience, and we know. And so we can use that and make it fearful, or we can transform that into something beautiful and live an intentional life that is full of goodness, truth, beauty, and love.
Well, exactly. You know, I was thinking about this recently too, because I was thinking exactly what you said. Like, we can't avoid death and suffering. And in a funny way, that's so trivially true. We should know this, but at least I don't live like that, right? I live in the assumption that actually I can avoid this somehow. But it's like, no, I will have to face this. And so I think this is where religion is so powerful, you know. And something like Buddhism is actually founded on the Buddha, the young unenlightened Buddha's discovery of actually life has, you know, suffering, old age, sickness, death. These are part of life, and I can't escape them, so what am I going to do with this? And I think Christianity is very similar. I am going to be crucified if I'm not being crucified already. So crucifixion, so to speak, in the broadest metaphorical sense of that term, crucifixion is something that I have to deal with. There's no way that I can avoid it. So how am I going to relate to it? How am I going to conduct myself in suffering? How am I going to attend to others and to myself and to the world in suffering and to the suffering, right? Yeah. And I think that's why religion, and particularly Christianity and Buddhism, because every religion deals with it in some way, but that's why it's so important, because it reminds us that actually, life is full of suffering. I am being crucified. What do I do about it? And of course, you know, Christianity gives the answer: voluntarily accept it out of love for being, something like that. You know, different ways you could phrase it, but voluntarily accept that suffering for the sake of the goodness of being. And once you really assimilate that, or once I start to really contemplate that, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I can endure, you know, life and all that it entails, even the darkness, even the suffering. And I think that's what's really, really beautiful about Christianity, religion, all these things that are oriented to the divine. Yeah.
No, I think there's a lot there. I mean, I guess any last thoughts before we kind of close out? I mean, we've talked about a lot.
We've talked about a lot, and I came into this thinking we wouldn't have much to talk about.
I wasn't worried.
Okay. Any last thoughts? Well, Dostoevsky said somewhere that beauty will save the world. So beauty will save the world. We need it. It nourishes us. It actually also, just thinking about suffering and death, it gives us a sense that maybe there's even this beauty in suffering and death, which is what we talked about, right? Maybe there's this beauty to transitoriness or this redemptive beauty. It says that maybe it gives us a felt, visceral sense that maybe being, even nature, is good enough, even with suffering, right? For us to embrace. And paradoxically, at the same time, maybe it gives us a sense that there's something beyond the natural world, beyond the world that we know, that is even more rich, even more powerful, even more good and beautiful.
Yeah.
And we can't live without beauty. And find something in your life that gives you beauty. That would be my advice to the audience. Whatever it may be, if you feel like your life doesn't have meaning or beauty, seek it out. See what gels with you, whether it's visual art or whether it's poetry or whether it's religion or just completely secular poetry or something like that, and feel that, and
Well, like the embrace of beauty leads to more beauty, and like if you're really truly living a beautiful life and discerning those things and going through life learning that, like, you can only have more joy.
Yeah. And
that's what we're searching for, right?
And read the Symposium as well. It's the most, in a sense, it's the most accessible of Plato's dialogues, and it's the most beautiful of Plato's dialogues, and it deals with beauty and love. And it really has that message of, if you find that beauty wherever you find it, don't just stop with it, right? Like, what is deeper than that, right? If you sense the beauty in the natural world or in people, what's deeper than that? How further and deeper can you go? And that will lead you to where you need to be, I think. And this is not coming from someone who's achieved that by any means. This is someone who's desperately seeking that too. So, yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much, Cassidy.
Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will close with a serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.